DC Public Schools. Well, DC Public Schools have come a long way. Many are still going to argue, though, that this is kind of a tale of two cities, with the west side of the city having much different experiences than, say, the eastern parts of the city. And we are definitely going to talk about that because a lot has changed over the last few years. That line's sort of getting blurred and things are definitely changing about public school in DC. So let's dive in because there's a lot of stuff to cover. I am Melissa Terzic, DC Real Estate Mama. This is my channel, it's Living in DC. I cover all things about the DC metro area to include the Maryland suburbs of DC as well as the Virginia suburbs. If that's your thing and you're into that, please subscribe and click the little bell notification so that you'll get notified when I do new videos. Also, do all the things. Comment. I get the comments, they get pinged to me, so I will respond to them, or if you want to send me a message by email, I get plenty of those too from you guys, and I'm more than happy to talk more in depth or cover something that's specific to you. I'm also going to put my contact info up on the screen here. We'll put it at the end of the video as well. Now, let's dive in. And I need to make a disclaimer first. So you know those parents in schools that are like all up in the teachers' faces and they're always like involved in things and complaining about curriculums and such? That's not me. So you should just know that the things that I'm gonna say, you may have to take with a grain of salt. I tend to not dive into this stuff. I'm busy selling houses for my clients. I run East Coast Corgi Rescue. I've got my own 2 little kids, and we kind of have a whole life, and I just don't have time that I've got to, spend to go question every little decision that's made by the school or the administration or the teachers, anything like that. Only when there's a problem that affects me or our family does the school hear from me. I'm going to talk about something that did prompt me to send an email to the chancellor in DC, but other than that, for the most part, I'm more hands-off. I tend to just believe that the teachers are in place because they're got hired and they're going to do a good job, and only if I feel like something's just not right will I reach out. So if you're a lot more of a hands-on parent, then you kind of have to take the things that I'm saying with a bit of a grain of salt. Now, in DC, we have a school lottery, and this is a source of so much confusion for people. So I want to cover this first because I want to make sure that you understand the lottery and where you fit into it or not. So many people hear about it. It covers the public school education as well as charter schools in DC. So if you're interested in either one of those, then, ears forward, you've got to listen to this stuff about the lottery. If you are always guaranteed a spot for your inbound kindergarten through 12. So if you live in a neighborhood and your boundary school is whatever, ABC school, your child is guaranteed a spot from kindergarten through 12th grade in your in-boundary school, whatever you are zoned, assigned to, whatever it may be. Where the lottery comes into play is if you want one of the following 3 things. Are you ready? 3 things. Number 1, you want one of the coveted pre-K seats in DC. Many people hear about pre-K being free in DC. Many schools offer pre-K. Some of them offer at 3 years old, some offer at 4 years old, some offer both. And if you want one of those seats, no matter where you live, even if you live right next to the school, even if you're a hobbit in the school cafeteria, you do not have any sort of preference at all. You need to go into that lottery. Then there is sort of a hierarchy of preferences after that. Regardless, if you want a pre-K spot, you're in the lottery. Number 2, if you want a different in-boundary school for your child, no matter the grade level, you're going to have to go into the lottery to try to get a seat in that school. Number 3, if you want a charter school, anybody that's doing charter schools in DC, they are part of the lottery, and you need to make sure that you do your research, you go to EdFest, you visit the school, whatever you need to do, because the lottery system sort of operates separately than the public school system, even though they're overseen by the same group. All right, so free pre-K is obviously definitely a perk. I never ever recommend people trying to buy a house based on the fact that their kid may go to pre-K at that school. I have seen situations where people have lived in a neighborhood and never got a pre-K seat. It is gold if you get one, though. DC also has charter schools. Why would somebody want a charter school if they've got an in-boundary school? Well, there's a million reasons. Some charter schools have just different teaching styles, or they have language immersion. There's Spanish language immersion. I've got friends who have kids in Chinese language immersion, and that can be very appealing to families in a city that's as international as DC is. So I actually have a whole separate video on the lottery process. I talk about the hierarchy, and that's a pretty popular video on my channel. A lot of people hit that one up. So I go through everything and explain it. So if you're interested in the lottery and knowing more, please check that video out as well. Okay. So let's talk about DC public school academics. As far as academics go in public schools in DC, how involved you are as a parent is going to help dictate how successful your child is and what you think of DC. If you're a hands-on parent and you value public education, then this is probably going to be fine for you and it's going to work for you. It works for our family. I'm going to say this several times. We're still here. We haven't felt the need to flee to the suburbs. You are going to have to hold your kid's hand though and help guide them through on some things. And that's not universal across the board. That's not every day. It's not every week. There's just going to be certain times where you're going to find that your kids maybe not getting the instruction or the attention that you would like for them to have, and that's based on class size, which we're going to also get to shortly too. So if you're the variety of parent who really honestly has too much to do and you don't want to have to explain this like new Common Core kind of math to your kid, in DC it's Eureka math right now, but if you don't want to have to explain to your child how to subtract 4 from 62 by splitting 62 into 2 groups of 12 and 50, and then doing 12 minus 4, which is 8, and then adding 8 to the 50 that you've got over on the side and coming up with 58, and you think that that's maniacally insane like I did? You may be that person that emails the teacher like I did. We love her. She was like, don't worry about it. And you may also find that that's a little bit crazy. But your child's going to get frustrated trying to figure out, all I want to do is subtract 2 simple numbers, 62 minus 4, and this school is making me do all kinds of crazy. These are the things that happen. This is not just specific to DC. It is everywhere. This isn't just a DC problem, but just know that because of class sizes and the like, that you're probably going to have to get involved and help your kid get through some of this stuff, and help them work through all of it. All right, so the elementary schools in the city overall fare much, much better than middle school. And that is the same story, wash, rinse, repeat, that you're almost going to hear about every area in DC Metro, as well as probably the country. Guys, middle school sucks. Like, we all know it. We went through it. It's the freaking worst. Like, I wish we could just erase those years between 6 and 8. You've got mean girls, you've got bullies, you've got violence, you've got crazy, you've got cliques. Anyway, all of that stuff obviously trickles down to the education as well, even though that's the thing that they're there for first. Regardless of the fact, a lot of the middle schools are and then things kind of pick back up again once you get to high school. You'll find that there are families that will stay in DC through middle school and high school, but then you're also going to see that a lot of people do jet out. They just don't have the faith in the school system at this point, and we do know, I mean, I would almost say that like 40% of people might be leaving, 30%. That's of our friend group. I don't know if, different, groups are different. There's definitely enough of my kids' friends who are staying as we approach 5th grade this year. There's definitely enough who I know who are staying in the middle schools. So not super worried about it, that they're going to lose all their friends, and also not super worried about it thinking like, should we flee to the burbs too? I'm going to do other videos on the suburbs. It's not much different out there. All right, let's talk about DC public school extracurricular activities. So extracurriculars are basically also school dependent. Like I said, some might go through the aftercare program and people find things outside of the school. Suffice it to say, unless you have a child that's in a super popular sport that translates to like a college scholarship like football, you're maybe gonna find extracurriculars a little bit lacking. And that's also because you've got school capacity space problems, and that's universal across almost all schools in the district. All right, let's talk a little bit about the DC Public School Administration. So DC Public Schools is overseen by a chancellor and what they call OSSI, the Office of the Superintendent. There have been many, many, many years of scandal with these superintendent or chancellors, as they call them. But everything seems to be tracking right now under Chancellor Farabee. Everything seems to be looking good. Although, I did have to send him that note when he decided, like in April or May, that he wanted to extend the school year by a day, taking us from Friday, June 24th to Monday, June 27th. I'm sorry, June 27th is Mama's summer. You are not impeding on Mama's summer. Mama doesn't give a crap if we're just sitting at home watching YouTube videos. That day is Mama's summer. I had to send Chancellor Farabee a nasty gram. I'm sorry, Chancellor Farabee. Your picture's very cute and you've done good stuff. And I feel like we're on a good track right now. And barring any other scandal that shows up that nobody knew about of anything that might be happening on your watch, like I think everything is moving along quickly. I just needed my day of summer back. I guess I wasn't the only mom because he dialed it back and we went right back to the 24th, which I still think is late, but it is what it is. We have a 9-week summer here, and that's what happens in DC. In 2007, the mayor's office actually assumed responsibility for administering the schools under 𝐒𝐈, which is the Office of the State Superintendent. Even though DC is not a state, that is what they call it. And so the DC Board of Education actually kind of has little impact, even though they do exist. There are currently 8 public high schools in DC, which your child would have a right to attend based on where you live and the boundary. There are plans to build a 9th high school, which is going to be in the Palisades area, and that is being referred to as MacArthur High School. There are 6 specialty high schools, which are also application-based, but they're also public. There are 14 middle schools and 65 elementary schools. There are also 15 education campuses, which span grades that are usually between like 2 school groups, so K through 8, or sometimes, you know, elementary and middle, or middle and high school bulked together. All of this aside, your school's principal has to be strong, and they have to run the school like it is their own. That means that they need to push back on 𝐒𝐈, DC Public School Office when things aren't right. Someone at a high-ranking elementary school once said to me, we don't have to wait for them. We do things that are right for our school regardless of what they tell us. And you gotta like that. Like, I really like that moxie, you know, like she's not afraid to go against what they say, or if they are making her wait, 5-6 days for attention to something that they deem an emergency, like a leak or a rat problem, they handle it, and then they just deal with DC Public Schools on the other end. That's an advocate. I'm a fan. All right, so now we're going to talk about No Child Left Behind. So DC schools have historically and notoriously kind of suffered in terms of quality of education. And I've lived in DC for 17 years. I've seen it where some schools are basically about to close down, where parents get involved and help turn them around, where parents get involved and there's a massive battle with a principal. I've seen all kinds of crazy that you kind of almost wouldn't expect, but adults don't always play nicely either. So things have actually changed, and a lot of the DC schools, though, have become highly ranked. A big part of that is the fact that families and parents are deciding to stay and raise their kids in the city. But here's what you need to know, and this is almost like a very hard truth for people to acknowledge and then fully comprehend, right? And that is that the socioeconomic disparity in DC runs the gamut. And this is no joke. Like, you have 2 very different and distinct extremes in economics in families here. And DC makes decisions that help everybody, but they really do have to focus on some of these families. And so what does this mean, okay? Like, what am I talking about, and how does this work in practice? So it means that we have a 9-week summer, and it's seemingly getting shorter all the time. Why is that? Well, you've got kids that unless they're in school, they're not gonna get breakfast and lunch every day. And that's a really sad reality that we deal with being in the city. So there are also many vacations during the year because they stretch the school year out longer than, it might be. So, and I've got friends in other areas that are like, God, you're still in school, or geez, you guys went back early, or whatever it might be. But there's a method behind all of that madness, and that's to make sure that they get bodies into classrooms and into schools so that they can offer them breakfast as well as lunch, and then sometimes there's programs that will send them home with food as well so that they have dinner. So DCPS Public Schools sent out a survey a couple years ago asking questions and comments about the public calendar that they were attempting to put together for the next 3 years, of which we're about to go into the 3rd of those 3 years that they were asking us about. And what was weird was that, like, a lot of people were really interested in keeping the February and April breaks, even though they hadn't been the norm prior to that school year that they instituted the survey. And how do I know that people answered this? Because for some stupid reason, all the answers were public. If you clicked on the spreadsheet and then you just clicked a couple times, you could get in and see what like the 100 answers before you said. So you could actually see comments from teachers who were saying, you're bringing us back way too early. There's way too many professional development days. And it was sort of mind-blowing because you're like, I can actually like dig into this and see exactly who's mad and why they're mad and what their issues are and all of that. Regardless, you had answers on there that were unbelievable. The people in the socioeconomic status where the kids aren't getting food on the table are also probably the same people that maybe don't have time to fill out a survey, right? So a lot of what you saw in there was like, well, please, our family really enjoys our February break because we take a vacation and that's a really good reset for my family. Meanwhile, so just so you know, there's going to be families in February that are going to Vail so that they can go skiing, and then there's going to be families in February that don't know where their next meal is coming from. And those families may all be attending the same school in DC. So these are the decisions that DC has to make for them. So I find the short summer to be a royal onion in my ointment. And I also find all the days off during the year to be totally disruptive. But you have to be okay with this because you have to realize that there's a greater good here and that there is a no child left behind thing, and that includes things beyond education. It includes things like, you know, taking care of their needs and food and things like that are super important. During COVID, when people were all homeschooling, there were neighborhoods where kids were just running around during the day because their parents weren't homeschooling them. Before you blame the parent, they might have been an essential worker, right? They might have been somebody like a police officer, a fire person, trash removal, somebody that had to show up for work every day, but also couldn't afford to have a sitter or something. And there were kids that were home. And there were some people in neighborhoods saying, there's little kids running around my street all day long, and I don't know where their parents are. These are the kids that aren't getting food, and COVID was extremely disastrous for some of these people. So some schools have had teachers also that may change up to 4 times during the year. I saw it with friends of mine who had their child in a pre-K and kindergarten. They said the teachers just keep changing. And if you think, how bad could kindergarteners have to be to make 4 teachers leave? I can actually tell you that it can start before kindergarten. We put my daughter into a neighborhood pre-K. It's a community pre-K. They put all ages into one class. There was a 5-year-old boy in there who was almost 2 full years older than her because she was very young for her age to be in there, but she just made the cutoff. That kid almost broke her arm fighting over a toy. She came home and she had like a huge gash in her arm. I was surprised I didn't even get a note about it. But you know, then there was another kid in there who was 4 and she hated being dropped off there, and they would have to hold her down every day and she'd be screaming, F you, but she'd be saying it. I'm gonna get my lawyer, I'm gonna get my gun, I'm calling my lawyer, I'm gonna shoot you in the head. 4 years old. So you know that this child is hearing this stuff at home as well. So there are some schools in the city that this may happen. And so these are things that you've got to research, dive into, ask around, all that good stuff. And it does change all the time. So when it comes to grades and testing, teachers are actually bonused in DC for certain things. A principal of a high school that I will not name had instructed the teachers of all the seniors that if any student loses a college application approval or a scholarship, it's on you. I am holding you personally responsible for that, meaning your job might be in jeopardy if any of these kids lose anything. And so they had, you know, no incentive to go with a real grade. They were just pushing everybody through with A's and B's. Everyone's a winner. All right, so something else to understand about DC is that No Child Left Behind also applies to the children of foreign diplomats. So all in-boundary students, regardless of where they are, who they are guaranteed a spot in DC schools. My kid's elementary school happens to be in the same boundary as the Russian embassy. So about 25% of the school, I might be guessing off the cuff, but that's essentially what it feels like for a moment. In one moment, I'll explain why. About 25% of the school is comprised of Russian students, and foreign diplomats have just as much right to those pre-K spots that are very coveted as any kid in DC. Now, when Russia invaded Ukraine earlier this year, the embassy instructed the families to withdraw their children, and just like that, 25% of our school's population was gone. So as we head into a new school year, those children aren't back. And so if they don't come back, those seats have to get filled somehow, right? Now we have all these extra teachers, we've added classes because we've accommodated for increased capacity, added trailers in the schoolyard, things like that. Now we've got to figure out, all right, what's going to happen? Those seats may get filled with kids from other boundaries off of the wait list. And so the administration pushes very, very strongly to each school that they want them to take off the wait list. And rumor proven fact, which is now true, is that one minority child is allegedly worth two white children in DC when it comes to DC public schools. So teachers are bonused for more for an out-of-boundary kid, read a minority student, that would score well on a test. And if that isn't maddening and sad and unfair, like a Ginsu knife commercial, but wait, there's more. Let's say all those Russian families come back and now we have a school that's 25 or 30% over capacity. This is a problem because, like many schools, DC struggles with class sizes and keeping things manageable for teachers. My daughter had 30 kids in her second grade, and you would not believe how many children were squeezed into the smallest footprint of a classroom possible. Her teacher was in his early 20s, and he admittedly had trouble handling several of the bigger behavioral issues that might have been in that class. And the way that the kids were packed in there was like an unbelievable fire hazard. Because space was at such a premium, kids had to leave their coats and backpacks out in the hall. Then what starts happening? Kids' lunches and coats started getting stolen. Kids would have no lunches, their coats were missing. These are the things I find absolutely maddening. Like, we can't find another solution to this. This is absolutely nuts. But we're still here. My family is still here. And the truth is, though, through elementary school, I have been so blown away by my children's teachers that I'm so sad to see every year come to an end that I cry like an idiot on the courtyard when we're saying goodbye to their teachers. Next year, I'm going to have a middle schooler, and I'm biting my nails hard for this. I think that the middle school has definitely turned around in the past 5 to 7 years under the guidance of a very beloved principal who has now left to work at a school that's closer to his family. So there's a new high school coming as well, and that's supposed to alleviate a lot of the overcrowding at the former Wilson High School, which is now known as Jackson Reed High School. So that's school administration. College. So let's talk about what happens when it comes to college and all of that in DC. DC doesn't have any state schools. However, in lieu of that, they currently have what they call a TAG program, and that is the Tuition Assistance Grant, which is what TAG stands for. The program's fantastic, but every year it's always in jeopardy, and they always say that it's gonna, fall by the wayside. So double check to make sure that they still have funding and there's funding available, but here's how it works. The TAG grant offers kids $10,000 toward any state school anywhere else in the US against the out-of-state tuition. So let's say you're looking at a state school. Let's say for, in-state residents, that school is $24,000, but for out-of-state residents, it's $39,000. You would get it for the $39,000 with a $10,000 subsidy from DC that's renewable every 4 years. So your tuition essentially translates to $29,000, whereas the state kids there are paying $24,000, but out-of-state's paying $39,000. So you're doing pretty good. Program always comes under fire. They're always trying to get rid of it, but everybody advocates for it. And as of right now today, it's still in place. So let's wrap it up. As I said, we're still here. Some of my kids' friends have begun the great migration and the flight to private schools or out to the suburbs, but we have all talked about this in our family, and at this point we said if we feel like it changes or anything like that, we would consider leaving DC public schools. At this point in time, we're pretty invested. We like it. There's a group of parents that are advocating for a lot of things that are sort of forging the path ahead of us, and I love those parents. I am not one of them because, like I said, Corgi Rescue Real Estate, you people who call me for houses, and I love you all. Those things are my priority. So I don't have, the wherewithal, but there's always somebody forging that path, and they do a great job. So I wouldn't trade, at this point, I wouldn't have traded anything that we've done for a chance at getting my kid into a quote-unquote better school. But we're going to cover the other school districts as well. So I'm Melissa Terzis, DC Real Estate Mama. If you have any questions about schools, call me, email me. My contact info is coming next.